Welcome to the April California Horticultural Society meeting. And at 7 o'clock, we'll be joined by Meghan Ray, who's the garden manager at the Blake Garden, and she'll be giving us a lot of history and information on the garden. That's a wonderful gem of a garden up in the Berkeley Hills in Kensington. So we'll hear all about that in a little bit, about a half hour. And I want to thank Mark for organizing the coffee in the garden this last Saturday. That was great fun. We had a couple gardens on the tour and the Wave Garden as well. And if anybody wants to add to that, by all means. Here's everybody enjoying themselves. This is mostly at Mark's house, which was more suited to gathering, whereas Kips' house was more intimate, we'll put it that way. And so a lot of good friends we saw, and hopefully some new friends were met. And there's always something to talk about when you go on a garden tour, because everybody likes to talk about plants, so you never can be shy there. So this is a little bit of Mark's garden, and notice the Cantua, because we have a slide on Cantua a little later. So this is Mark. It looks like the old man of the Andes there. And his little garden creature in his fig tree there. And then this was Mark. That's a ferula. This plant in the middle. That's a little bit.
Ferula communis, although I'm probably not pronouncing it right. If there's any Latin speakers.
And that's 6 foot tall, was it not? Or maybe taller.
Yeah, it's taller than I am.
And has really fine foliage, which you don't really see in this.
But we're really enjoying it.
Okay, and then we went to Kips' garden afterwards, and Kips on Ashby Avenue, and you can go there and look over his, he has his fence. Here's everybody on the street, on the sidewalk looking in, and then there's a fairly, I don't know, it's probably about a 60-degree angle up. I know it's pretty steep up, and then it on the left-hand picture it goes down. I thought it was really awesome. All I could say was,
what street was this on?
This is on Ashby near Sacramento. Amazing garden. Has the agave silver fox. Judy,
wow.
You contributed this one. If you wanted to talk about this at all.
Yeah, I just it is a mangave, like you said, called silver fox. It's got the structure of an agave and the fast growth and color of a mangave. So it's kind of a thick, waxy coating, which gives it the kind of silvery look that you see. And it tolerates a little bit more water than other succulents. So that's kind of nice, although it's still a low water succulent. Does need well-drained soil, does need full sun, and will be evergreen, so to speak. But probably best in zones 9 to 11. So if you live in a really cool spot, it might not be as happy. But it's available through Monrovia and also through Walter's Gardens.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Yeah.
Here's a couple observations that I had, and I loved how he had the string of pearls kind of as a little ground cover in between all his rocks and such. And Kip said he had gathered the rocks up in the Berkeley Hills. And like I said, it was pretty steep. And as he mentioned, if he had everything on the flat, everything would be kind of piled up on each other. So you can put a lot more plants in a small space when it's going up, right? Vertical garden kind of thing, which I thought was kind of an interesting observation. And then he has his hillside going up against his house. And so he had this pipe structure with porcelain tiles in front of it. And to the right here is his house wall. And then on the left is the pipes with the porcelain tiles that he essentially has his hillside against. And then I know, is that an something or other, astrophytum. I don't know what they're called.
I think so.
Thank you. And then I don't know what this aloe is. I thought it was striata, but I was looking on the internet and I can't find anything with this beautiful striping. I just think that was so gorgeous. Anybody know what that is?
I bet it's got striata parentage.
Yeah.
I thought it was just so beautiful with all that beautiful markings on there. Anyway, so that was really a treasure. And then he had Calicortis, which was amazing.
Yeah.
And he had just redone his garden over the pandemic, so it's only a couple years old at the most. And he on the right, he has the no, that was Lutea. I can't remember if that's Lutea. Seems appropriate, but you can see that he has screening over this. It almost looks like a euphorbia next to the left. And evidently he just put that out. He's screening against sunburn, he said. And then on the left, it's he has a I think it's Calicortis alba, which is a dark form of alba. And
Who is this? Whose stuff is this?
this is
Oh,
Kips
Kip.
garden. Kip McMichaels.
Right. I couldn't go. I was too exhausting.
Well, you'll have to go again, because it's right on the street.
Yeah, I drove by it. I saw.
Oh, good. Well, it's amazing. So he has all those Calicortis. Anyway, anybody else want to mention anything about his garden there?
But just thanks to Judy for introducing him to us. I mean, here he lives within a mile of me and I never noticed somehow. It's just, and Ken told me he was really inspired and it gave him all sorts of ideas for his own.
Well, I have to give credit to Dick Turner, because he's the one that told me about it. And that's how I contacted him for a Western Hort Talk. And then I thought, well, maybe a visit would be nice. And it certainly surpassed all of my expectations.
Really
Me too.
fabulous. I wanted to thank Kip and Patrick very much. They were so generous and welcoming, and they gave people little samples of things to take home and try. And it was the most beautiful place. It was astounding, the amount of work that he's put into that front garden.
Yeah.
It's just astounding.
Actually, it was interesting. It was in kind of partial shade because he had, I don't know if it, tree aloe that was shading part of it. And then also the silk gloss tree, Charicia, or now it's Sevia speciosa.
There was a Charicia in the corner.
Yeah. But it was kind of dappled shade, which I think is, I think probably helps with most succulents to a certain.
Yeah, I think succulents don't want to be cooked.
Yeah, I think that's
It was
Good
beautiful,
point.
really stunning.
few announcements. Thanks, Dave. Well, I think hopefully everybody got their seeds by now. And if he was here, he would remind you that as your spring flowers go to seed, to collect your seeds and send them to him. And then we talked about Bart's American Horticultural Society Liberty High Bailey Award last month, but he wasn't here. So we just want to congratulate him on that. Very
Yay.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Bart.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to present Meghan Ray. And Megan's a horticulturist and garden historian. She's worked in the Botanic Gardens for most of her career. First the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens, and then UC Botanic Gardens at Berkeley. And now she's at the UC Blake Garden from 2018, where she's currently the garden manager.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. So today I thought I'm going to talk about Blake Garden. So it's our 100th birthday. And we're really blowing it because we're not doing enough to celebrate the fact that it's the 100th birthday of the garden. There's some question because it was 1922 when they broke ground for it, and they didn't maybe move in until a year later. So maybe we'll have to gather ourselves and have more of a celebration next year. But it's a 100-year-old garden, and it's located in Kensington, which is about 4 miles north of the Berkeley campus. So
It's very
the Blake
small.
family actually lived where the UC Memorial Stadium is now. They had 3 mansions that they built on the property that was given to them by the matriarch of their family, whose name was Harriet Stiles Waters Blake. And she was related to the Stiles of Stiles Hall on campus, and they were all very connected to the early days of UC Berkeley. And so they lived on Piedmont Avenue, which is right where the stadium is now. And when I first came up to Blake, I was sort of envisioning Blake Garden as being this project of this young couple that were just starting out in their life together, and they had this house and garden, but they actually had a very well-established garden across the 3 mansions that they had on Piedmont Avenue. And they were really already in their 40s and had been married for quite a long time. So let's see. So this is a picture of older Anson and Anita Blake. But this is a letter that we have a copy of from 1890, where Anson Blake gets a letter from Anita Blake's father saying that he can't marry her yet. He has to wait until she graduates from college. So they're actually married in 1894. And so they don't move to Blake Garden until 1922. So you can imagine they had many years building this first garden that they had on Piedmont Avenue. And we actually have a lot of Anita and her sister Mabel's own words, because they wrote many articles. They wrote several articles for the Bulletin of the Cal Hort Society. They were very early members and often attended, bringing their rare treasures with them to show. But they both, in different articles, write how traumatized they were, like leaving their established garden. And Anita says, I told my husband I would move over my dead body. But they lost their land, so they had to move. And here's this stadium juggernauting through the Piedmont Avenue. And so where they ended up, because they really wanted to live somewhere where they would have enough space to keep their families together, as they had these 3 mansions down on Piedmont Avenue. So this is an image of the San Pablo Rancho, which was a land grant of almost 18,000 acres that basically went all the way from, north of where the bay is, all the way down, includes El Cerrito, Kensington, Albany, the Albany Bulb. And this was this giant land grant that was used as a ranch. And it kept being divided as the family grew and it was inherited out. They would break it into smaller and smaller lots. It was apparently the subject of a really big lawsuit that took place in the turn of the previous century. And apparently also, just like the Dickens novel, a lot of the land ended up just going for fees to the lawyers because there was so much contention about who could own what. But there was one big lot that was 600 acres that was called Lot 1, and it was down in the more southern portion. And a real estate speculator named Frank Woodward borrowed a lot of money from different investors because he was going to build on it. And if he had not defaulted on the loan, Blake Garden would essentially have been residential infill, just like everything else that's around it. But because he couldn't pay his loan to Harriet Stiles Blake, she ended up with 60 acres up, it was basically ranch land at the time. And just at the moment when her family needed a place to live. So she had 4 children and she offered them all 10+ acres each. And 2 of her children decided not to take her up on it because they lived in different places, but 2 of her children did decide. So Anson and Edwin got one 20-acre plot. And so this was Anson's business. Anson was part of Blake Brothers, who were quarrymen and pavers. So apparently, if you walk it around Oakland, you can still see the stamp of Blake Brothers or Oakland pavers. They did a lot of rock crushing. They were related to Anson's grandfather was Eli Whitney Blake, who was related to Eli Whitney, and he invented a rock crushing machine and came west as a 49er. And they did a lot of mining, but moved into the quarry business and had this Richmond quarry all the way until Standard Oil bought it in the 60s. So they had this big property and they decided to make one 20-acre estate. Now, Anita Blake's sister, Mabel Sims, she calls herself a botanist, but she was also trained as a landscape architect. She was one of the first students at the landscape architecture department at Cal. She went in 1914. She had already graduated with an undergraduate degree, but she went back to study landscape architecture. And she practiced in the way that I think a lot of women landscape architects of that era did. She sort of worked for people that she knew and did gardens for friends and family. But this was the place where she ended up living. So this house here is the Anson Blake house, and it was purposely built to contain Anson and Anita and Mabel, and then Anita and Mabel's mother, but she passed away before the house was completed. This house up here is the Edwin Blake house, and it was for Edwin, his wife Harriet, and Mrs. Harriet Stiles Blake, who is both of their mother. So what I think is so interesting about this plan is that considering how many landscape architects have had their hands on Blake Garden in the 100 years that it's been in existence, this plan is really still a lot, existing in most of its features, which I think really speaks to the fact that it was a very good, sensitive design in the beginning. So if you haven't been to Blake Garden, you would say, I don't know, this looks like more than a 10.5 acre garden, and Blake is only 10.5 acres. And that's because Edwin Blake passed away and his property was donated to the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church kept 3 acres and the house, and then sold the rest for residential development. So our north side neighbors, this is a street called Jessen Court, are just, it's residential infill. And then this house is currently the monastery of Carmelite sisters. There's 8 to 10 of them that live there, and they're a silent and cloistered order. So they're actually perfect neighbors. But we have been on their site. They're allowed to communicate with people if they need to do business with you. And so we've been to the monastery to help them with some things. And it's very interesting because this is really all still existing. So all this shape of this was their rose garden when Edwin lived there, and this alley is still all existing. So this is what it looked like in 1924. So the house is just built. So this is the Anson Blake, and this is the Edwin Blake house. But you can see all around, you can really see the residual ranch land. So Anita Blake describes visiting on the first day that they went to see the property before they decided to build on it. And, it was a beautiful spring day, but they still saw the slaughtering area where they killed all the cattle that was right down here. And so the coyotes used to have coyote tracks that came down through both of these channels that are tributaries of Cerrito Creek and that are the north and south border of the property. So you can see here the house, and when we look a little more, this is the formal garden pool. And you can also see that it's very unwooded, unvegetated, except for the areas by the creeks. So here we have a picture of what's the formal garden with the magnolias that are Magnolia grandiflora. And what I didn't know, and I actually learned while I was, or maybe I read but didn't really pay close enough attention, is that they didn't know what varieties these were. And after they planted them, they felt like these were all different varieties of grandiflora because they had different sizes and shapes and forms and different flower types. And there we have little Anita. It's a little hard to see her, but she's standing there. So here's the area just planted. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Kensington area, but it's fascinating for a lot of reasons. We're on the Hayward Fault. We're in a historic landslide area called the Blakemont Slide, but there's also tons of springs. So one of the first things that they did, which was, I thought, really brilliant, was they built this grotto, and behind this grotto is a basin, and the basin is filled with a spring that then came across under the path and down the back of the grotto, through this channel into the formal pool. And there's an outlet on this side that then goes over to a third pool and then down into the north tributary of Cerrito Creek, which is a beautiful landscape feature, but was also basically their solution to drying out the ground enough so that they could plant, because it was very, it was wet because it was in the path of the spring. So they just diverted the water to do that. So here's another picture of Anita, and here's the grotto, and here you can see the first plantings. And so now I mentioned that they had moved plants from their garden because they didn't have to buy the property. They persuaded UC to, instead of giving them money to buy land, that they would get the service of having workmen help them ball and burlap and move their plants. So they moved 35 wagon loads of plants, and they just brought them to the site and healed them in. And then as soon as the construction was done, they were able to plant them. So here she is, but she also was very interested in collecting Asian art. So her house was apparently filled with scrolls and pottery and a lot of different things, but you can see here, there's a figure, and we can't see, but on the other side, there's a second figure, and these characters are still existing in the garden today. They're apparently typical figures from Chinese opera. They're the sun god and the moon goddess. And when you go to Filoli, if you take the house tour, they actually have the identical characters in smaller and more highly glazed figures, but they're exactly the same. These guys were probably outdoor sculptures. They were probably on a temple roof, and their faces, like their flesh tones, are unglazed. And apparently when they first got them, they were very sooty. And so she thought that they were chimney pots. But I was talking to an art historian who said, no, they were much more likely to have been ornaments on the top of a roof. But it's interesting because they're still there today. And it's also interesting because you can see the connection to the Edwin Blake house, which you cannot see today because they're a cloistered order. There's a big wall that goes all the way around their property. So here's the picture of the rose garden from the Edwin Blake house looking down onto the Anson Blake house. And you can see here, this is the open lanai. This is the living room in the house. There's the entry hall, the dining room, and the kitchen. Here's where they had their rose garden, and here's this bridge. And this bridge is still existing on our property, but there's a wall that goes right across it. So my coworker thought, since it's one of the nicest architectural features that we have, we put a big mirror there to sort of, you know, have it be something, and people are really fascinated by it. So this picture is to show you how thin the house is. So for that, you know, considering the size of the house, it's a very thin house. And the reason that they did that, and you can see it here, is because, well, and you can see this is the Golden Gate Bridge right here. It's very windy. So they purposely asked the architect to make them a long, thin house so that they would have a windbreak for this formal part of the garden. So they actually, you know, most of the time, I think landscape architects and garden designers kind of get this property with this house already built, and they're like, okay, make a garden around it. But actually, this house was designed specifically with the intentions of the garden designers in mind. And so, you know, that they were very avid horticulturists. They corresponded with people, plant explorers, different societies. They got seeds from everywhere. They were really interested in experimenting, and they wrote to people and they corresponded, and they got seeds in the mail from people. This is a picture of a letter from, it was either probably 1920 or 21, from James West. And I don't know if anyone has ever heard of James West, but he was a plant explorer who did a lot of plant collecting in South America. And he brought plants and seeds back for the Botanical Garden. We still have some of the James West collections, but he also would collect for individuals who would ask him. And so you can see it says, thank you for the check, because he sent, you know, they gave him a check to get some seeds. And it just, they bought seeds from wherever they could get them, but they also got a lot from Charles Abraham of Western Nursery, and different nurseries around the East Bay. They were interested in really having like the most unusual things they could have. And they were fearless experimenters. So they planted some things just to be windbreaks. So, you know, Anita and Mabel both sort of make excuses for the Laurus nobilis that they have on both sides of the house, which are still existing. But they thought that they would be good windscreens, and they still, you know, they're obviously happy there because they're there 100 years later. But they also planted Canary Island pines, which they thought were super tender. And, you know, they said they seem to have gotten damaged. I guess one of the reasons that Cal Hort was founded was in response to the freeze in the 1930s. And so they talk about how the pines got damaged at that time, but they're still existing now. And they actually are some of the nicest pines that we have after, you know, 100 years. So here we have, you know, this is the post-war building boom. So just comparing the aerial photograph from the first one that we saw when there was really basically nothing in any of these. Now they're just smack in the center of, you know, of Kensington and El Cerrito. And this is interesting partly because you can see also how much their vegetation has grown since we saw the picture when they first did their construction. But also these beds, which we call the diamond beds, it's our Mediterranean plant collection, isn't on Mabel Sims' original plan, but you can see that it was existing in the Blake's time because it's here, it is prominently in our aerial photograph. And here's the square garden, and here's the house. So I think this is really interesting to see how fast this all got thrown up around them. And so this is a note from the meeting of Cal Hort from 1957, and Anita had come and she talked about all the plants that she was growing in her garden, and she discussed what was doing well and what wasn't doing well. And I mean, I have this list, and that, you know, it was interesting to go through it because so unlike a botanical garden, the plants that came onto Blake weren't accessioned, right? So in a botanic garden, every plant gets an individual number so that you always know not only that you have, Laurus nobilis, but which Laurus nobilis is it? Specifically, it has a number for, its accession. But they didn't really do that. So, I mean, I know I have a lot of these plants still existing, but I don't know for certain that these are actually the Blake plants that they planted. In some cases, I can be pretty sure that they are, but in some cases it could just be after. So, the bay laurel, we know that they have, and these cryptocarias they had right near the house. But we actually have some really beautiful Cryptocaria rubras they're just some of my favorite trees. They're beautiful, and they're in the canyon. We definitely have a lot of Hoharia. That was a plant that they planted a lot. It's a New Zealand ribbonwood. I don't know how many people are familiar with it. It's a myrtaceous tree, and it has a really pretty white flower. And it's interesting because it has a shredded bark that is called lace bark sometimes, and we actually use it in our wreaths because you can tie it and make decorative ribbons, but apparently it was also used for all kinds of crafts in New Zealand. They it's a little hard to read, but we do have the Cercocarpus, which is still there and pretty famous, and people have come and take cuttings because I guess it's called, I guess, I can't remember if it's Catalina mahogany, if that's a common name for it, but it's only found on Catalina Islands, and its original population was so reduced that we have apparently some of the very few of them that are still existing. When we went and we looked at this is I'm sure the original Maytens that she planted. This one here, it's huge and old, and now it drops a lot. And she actually mentions, oh, everyone has really appreciated it, but it's very seedy. And it's a hideous weed for us. I would say of horticulture tasks, removing Mayten seedlings is probably pretty high on the list. She also, there's a lot of things that are still existing. The Canary Island pines, the Cunninghamias, the redwoods, some things we don't have anymore. The Catha edulis, which I know from working at the Botanic Garden, but then we have some very big species of Ilex parahuensis, the yerba mate, really big ones that make beautiful berries. So we do have a lot of things that she either, if they're the original specimens or the offspring of the original specimens, but we have a lot of the plants that Mrs. Blake and Anita and Mabel chose. And you can see she says she got things from the Royal Horticultural Society, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Charles Abraham, Golden Gate Park, Henry Corrivan, who was apparently a Swiss nurseryman, the Arnold Arboretum, and the Botanical Society of South Africa. So here's a picture from the 50s of Australia Hollow. Unfortunately, a lot of the things they planted in Australia Hollow were pretty weedy. So we have some pretty horrible acacias and other things, but there's some still, of the big eucalypts that they planted from that time. This is a pretty big wetland area. And in the Mabel Sims plan, they had planned to put the lake here as one would, for your 1920s estate, but they never actually did that. But one thing that there was this Pampas grass, and it was, I guess, a very horrible infestation of Pampas grass that had filled, because this is a wetland, it had filled the entire hollow. And it was a monstrous job that the manager before me, Lori Twitchell, and students took on to remove all this Pampas grass. They just had to work on it, but I'm grateful that they did that because now we don't have it as much. And so this is the diamond beds as they were in her time. She calls them, Mabel Sims calls them her experimental beds, and she grew a lot of irises there, I think is in the next slide now. But we don't have this step down anymore. We have more of a gravel switchbacks, but you can see these beds are still there going straight up to the house as, so this path is still there. I mean,
Are those beds, Megan?
Sorry?
Are those benches that,
They look like little benches, and we only have one bench now up at the top, and the rest are, it's just the switchback paths.
Mhm.
But it would make it nice. They did all their watering by hand. They had no in-ground irrigation. They spent their weekends, even into their 80s, moving hoses around. And when Walter Voden, who was the first hire by the UC and worked as their superintendent, wanted to put in-ground irrigation, they were horrified because they felt that, sprinklers and, irrigation like that would not allow them to be as specific as they like to be in it, taking care of the plants and as individuals. But it must have just been a huge job. And especially, as you're looking at these, you have to think, this is from the 50s. So basically, they just really suffered from a shortage of labor for a lot of the years during the war and then the post-war years. As far as I understand, they took care of the whole garden with one gardener and a half-time handyman. So I personally, we have 3 people plus, some students and volunteers, and I feel like we can barely keep it safe and open. So it's not surprising to me that it was in a pretty overgrown state when the university inherited it, but they were still very knowledgeable about their specimens, and they really knew what they had, even though it was in a pretty overgrown state. And you can also see in this is the house before some addition that I'll show you later. So this was where the cutting garden, we call it the cottage garden, is now, but you can see they would just put plants in here for experimenting, and they didn't really maintain it. It was just a kind of a test plot. And here you can see her irises. So this is the diamond beds with the irises. And this is the big rock. And it's still existing there. It's a famous rock in that it appears in the book, Rocks of Berkeley, which is a real book. And the reason that it's interesting to geologists is because it's glyphosate schist, but it's full of lawsonite. And lawsonite is a mineral that you only find on fault lines. And Lawson was a Berkeley professor who identified it first. And so as we are on the Hayward Fault, it's interesting for that reason. But it's also just a giant rock. And even though we have a small "please don't climb" sign, people always climb it. And so here you can see that this is the 1950s version of the formal garden and the pool. They had these big Irish yews there, but you can see even then that it's true, the magnolias were all different. This direction is the direction of the wind, and so this north-west corner magnolias always seem to suffer. I don't know if it's that one is so much smaller because it was a replacement, or if it was just stunted because of the wind. But so when the university inherited it, this is the square garden. And you can see that they were inspired by this idea of this Islamic 4-part garden. So the square pool is fed by these 4 channels that came down and met. And they're, supposed to indicate the 4 rivers coming into the center. If you've ever been to the Alhambra and the Court of the Lions, you can see something similar, or in other Islamic gardens, you often see that that design. But in the 50s and 60s, when they were really in the most throes of modernism, they decided it was too messy, too distracting. There was too much stuff going on. So they blasted out the channels and they left just the square. So here's the 1970s version with the smooth knot channels that you see today. And so here you can see we have it as it is today. We have the pots again that they had, but it was a pretty big movement to clear and simplify things at Blake during that era. So this is May Arborgast, and May Arborgast was a landscape architect, garden designer, and she was a lecturer at Cal. She probably would have been a professor, except it was, the 50s and she was a woman. So she taught, but she was the person who persuaded the Blakes basically to give their property to UC. She would always bring her students up and do plant walks, and she got to know Mrs. Blake. And I think at this point, so the Blakes are, they're getting older and they are looking towards the end of their life. And I think the garden was their life's work. And so they were really trying to figure out a way to ensure that the garden would continue to exist. And May Arborgast persuaded them that the best way to do that would be to give it to the landscape architecture department. So she worked with Anita and Mabel for the rest of their lives from 1957 onward to basically document every plant on the ground. And so she went and she made all these maps and tried to mark she has different ones for woody plants, different ones for trees. She has ones for shrubs. She has herbaceous, layer after layer of these hand-drawn maps. And we have them in our archives. May Arborgast also, just by, also for knowledge, she was the one who persuaded Beatrix Ferran to give her estate to UC Berkeley Landscape Architecture Department because she was about to give it to Harvard. And she met May Arborgast at the Huntington, and Beatrix Ferran, was unhappy with the way Harvard were dealing with her. And May Arborgast persuaded her that it would be so much better if she were to give her estate papers, drawings to UC Berkeley, which she did, and she endowed it, which has saved the department for many a year. The Beatrix Ferran Endowment is the thing that's kept that garden going, and that's really that department going, and that's really thanks to May Arborgast. So there she is, and here's one example of her maps. And this is Geraldine Knight Scott, and she was another professor. Here she is with the rest of the landscape architecture department, and here you can see our circle drive, and this is basically where the event lawn is, and this is the house in the corner here. And she came in and she was tasked with figuring out how do we make use of this space. We've got 10.5 acres. What do we do? We've got a house. What do we do? So there really was nothing the landscape architecture department could afford to do with the house. So the first years that it was belonging to the university, they made it a graduate women's dormitory, and graduate women lived in it. But it was very run down and far from campus and scary at night. So the first year there was like a dozen of them, and the next year there were 0. So she and the presidents of UC were trying to figure out what to do. And so she did this long range plan. And so one of her ideas was to make a bunch of accessory buildings and make it be an environmental center. So you can see down here, there's some rooms for classrooms, and then also student housing. And this is the house, and this is the garden, the formal garden as existing. So she's kind of left that. But she's taken these lower sections of Highgate, and she sells, in the plan, they sell these for residential development. And I know they actually consider doing this because we have a neighbor who lives right here who always complains to me that he lost his view. And he says, I used to have a view of the city. I don't have a view of the city anymore. And finally I was like, Ernie, why did you have a view of the city? I don't understand it. And he said, oh, because they cleared this part of the property because they wanted to sell it. And I'm like, well, Ernie, that's not exactly like a permanent solution. When it grows back, it wasn't intended to always be cleared. You might have had buildings there, but they ended up not being able to do this, partly because there's so many problems with, unstable land there. They could not sell this for development. But then they also didn't have money to build any of these buildings. And so most of the Scott plan ended up not being built. But she did it. She put together a book, And so she had all these drawings of her vision. And so this is behind the house. There would be an amphitheater for, like classroom, outdoor classroom space. This is the Australia Hollow. So she also thought there should be a lake here in the wetland. And up here is, some of the, the accessory buildings that she was proposing. And here we are in the canyon. And there's, a lot of kind of review of existing conditions. And in the end, what they ended up with was they really, really weren't able to implement many of these innovations. But what she did do was superintend a lot of clearing. Because when the Blakes were there, they did not want their plants cleared. They did not want things messed with. It's famously, Mabel would go out when it was rose pruning season and she would make them hold every cut until she approved it. And Anita was also like, never would take any plants out. So once they were gone, they were freer to kind of make these, clear out some of the sort of maturity that had built up over time. But what to do with the house? So they decide they're going to do a renovation and they're going to make it the official residence for the president of the UC system. And they spend $1,01960s, which is a lot of dollars. And they renovated the house. And you can see it was controversial. But what they ended up doing was doing a significant renovation and building on a addition on the back and an addition on the side, which, the implication for us today is that now the house couldn't be registered as an historic house because it was so significantly altered in the 60s. But they also did, they did some, structural stuff that they needed to do because the foundation was really compromised. And then it was the president's official residence from mid-1960s. President Hitch was the first president to live there. And I think maybe David Gardner was the last president to live there. But you can see that they had mixed some of the Blake furnishings with some of their own things, and then some things they had some decorators. And this bed is a President Taft bed. He was a relative of the Blakes. And so this is actually the Taft bed from the White House. And they, when they were doing a Taft museum, they asked for that bed back. And so they sent that bed away. But, it just has a very, kind of 1960s fancy house look to it. But it was also really a big time for making changes in the garden. In the 60s and 70s, they did a lot of student projects and they did a lot of clearing for sure. But so, they built some of these like student designs. This is they call it a Japanese bridge, and they made it because Geraldine Scott was she was very interested in Asian designs. They have this Japanese bridge, and they have this bench, which is not in this exact form, but is still kind of existing in the garden today. They did some armoring of the banks of the streams. And you can see, so this is the South Stream in the winter. It's almost dry in the summer, but when we get rain, because it's a lot of urban runoff that's put into storm drains, it pulses. And because it pulses like that, it erodes the underneath of the bank and it causes slumping. So, the answer in the 60s was to armor the bank, and that's what they did. But, we now mostly don't really do armoring the way they did then. But that was, another big project that they took on. They also had a children's garden. So this was a big children's garden. This is down at the bottom of the diamond beds. So the diamond beds are going up right here. And if you come to the garden today, you will see no trace of this at all. It's completely gone. It was actually funded. I want to say Standard Oil because I said it before, but I don't think it really was them, but it was somebody like that who gave them some money to make the children's garden. So they made it. And they actually had it only open for 3 years. And then because of funding cuts, they just felt like they couldn't support it. So they just tore it all down. But here are some delightful children playing in the children's garden, and they had programs and work study students who would come and you know, man the garden and do these programs every all year. They would work in the greenhouse in the winter and work outside in the summer. And this was a pergola that was a student contest, and you know, of things that people still ask me for today. There's like, where's the rose pergola? As though it was a historic structure, but this is actually 1972. It was a student design. He designed it with coat hangers. And then they tried to figure out, well, how can we really build it in real life? And they ended up using PVC. And so, but then it was a rose arch, and it was really much beloved. People still ask me, why don't you still have that? Because now, I mean, this, you know, over time just became unsustainable. And instead of replacing it in kind, they just removed it. But, you know, this is a 1980s plant inventory that we have that was done by Linda Haymaker. And she was a very long time horticulturist at the garden. And these are just some sample sheets. She went through the different sections, and she just typed up lists of the notable plants that were there. And these are really helpful for us to go through and look and see what there was, and, you know, what's still here, what, you know, and of course, you know, the names are often different, but thanks to the internet, we can usually you know, detective work it and figure it out. And so here we are, more or less today. And you can see there's a huge amount of heaving of the magnolia roots. The magnolias are like, you know, 100 now. So the interesting thing is, for visitors, it often seems to them like the safest thing is to walk along the edge of the pool instead of trying to traverse across the root filled grass area. So, you know, it's an interesting problem when you get a garden of this degree of maturity. You know, how do you, what should you do? And so, you know, I personally would just take them out and replant it. But since we don't have the money to do that, we're just sort of removing them as they die. And we lost 2 last year, and we'll keep on keeping them in as good a shape as we can for as long as we can. And then someday we'll replant it. And so here's some more pictures of the garden in its more current state. This is the formal garden, and here's Australia Hollow. You'll notice the lack of Pampas grass. But this area down here is, we grow as a California native wetland. And the area next to it was really kind of just not really being used. So the horticulturist who takes care of it now is making it a California native garden, focusing on things that pollinators like. And she has some very cute signs that some school groups made, that calling it the caterpillar crossing, because we have a lot of Asclepias fascicularis down there, and we've really had a lot of monarchs. This is the cottage garden, which we grow as a cottage garden style. I bring cut flowers to campus every week when I go down for a meeting with my boss, and it's a way for them not to forget that we're up here. So we still do use it as a cutting garden. This was really put into place when the presidents were living there, because they needed lots and lots of flowers for the formal events. Here's the square garden. This is a picture by Saxon Holt. He gave us permission to use it. This is looking through the planting onto the much reduced event lawn. And this is the Redwood Canyon. And these redwoods were brought by Anita Blake from their estate in St. Helena, either as seedlings or as cuttings. So they really are just about 100 years old. And, you know, so we try to do some other things. It's an interesting balance to have in a historic garden. Like, you want to keep your historic features, retaining the character of the garden, but still find ways to make it fun and relevant for visitors today. So this is our Create with Nature zone. And this is a school group having a facilitated visit with Zach Pine. He's the guy who helped Lori design it. And here's just some things, kids doing nature play. It's really interesting that they love it. The kids will just stay in there and just stack things and play for hours. And it's a pretty small space, but it really gets a lot of use. And here's some other like of the newer things. This is a bamboo tunnel that was made by Peter, who's Peter Susheki, who's Lori Twitchell's husband, and some students. And I can tell I'm not a kid anymore because kids will run through there and they go again, again. I'm like, yep, go again if you want, because they super love it. And here's an oversized chess set that we had a student and a staff member work together to make, and is super fun. Although their pieces turn out to be a little bit fragile for some of the rougher play. And then we have like just a log wall that we're playing with. And this is the mirror. That's here's the original stone bridge that would go to the Edwin Blake estate, but now it's just a mirror. I often have people come and rush over to tell me there's a hole in the wooden wall, but it's really usually just the mirror. So, you know, we also try to be relevant to the university because that we want to be part of what they're doing. And so these are some, you know, we'll have classes. We have plant ID classes that come every year. The plant ID is, in my opinion, not a big enough part of their program, but they do have to do plant ID. So they come to Blake and they do that. And here's a class called Rivers and Streams. And we every year try to have someone work on some project that has to do with our streams. This was a seismic project that we had in conjunction with the geology department. They did a seismic study, and these were two master's theses that were done. Well, this is actually a Rivers and Streams project, but this was a master's thesis that a woman did about carbon sequestration, and we did some samples in the garden. And this was unfortunately a weather station that shows that there is hazards to leaving things out in the wood. Because if there's one thing in a landscape that can be broken, the tree will fall on that thing. So this was actually a weather station, and this is one of the Hoherias, I think, or maybe not, but broken. She said, oh, it's no problem. I'll fix it and bring it back, but then she has not. And this one, which everyone thinks is a weather station, is actually a seismometer and a GPS, and it's to measure land movement because of our slide area. So we also try to, you know, one thing, it's a little easier to have students do these like more ephemeral interventions rather than have them do permanent projects on the site, because we can accommodate a lot more and let people do, you know, kind of bigger gestures if they're not permanent. So this is the inland program, that's a summer program, and students come and they just put these artistic interventions around the garden, and they're usually just there for either until the student comes and takes them down or until they just break down naturally. I have a lot of koi in the pool, and they all have names, and I was telling the students and they were very fascinated. So this is Leaf Anson koi, who is a very beautiful koi that someone made. And, you know, we also have a graduation is held at the garden for the landscape architecture program. And we have a camp out where we actually let the landscape students camp overnight, and they really love it. It's one of the highlights of their experience, they tell me. And, you know, we count on having students and volunteers, people come and help us, and garden clubs, painters, school groups, other groups. We really are happy to have the garden full of life and have people working there. And we have exhibitions. This was a year-long project about figuring out how to extract colors from plants that a artist did. And this was a photography show that we had. We have lots of different kinds of wildlife at the garden. And we have challenges. This was a little gate that one of our neighbors cut into our fence. I don't think you can see it in this slide, but I had the UCPD come because, you know, this was like a costly thing. We had to fix it. And she looked at it and she said, there's like $60 worth of tillandsias in that. As if you can see there's little tillandsias like threaded through this hole in the fence that she made. But, you know, just all of the usual things. An aging tree canopy, aging infrastructure, some vandalism, you know, the creek. So that's the end of the program. So thank you so much for being patient and listening to me. And I hope you'll come and visit Blake And, I would be happy to do in-person tours. I always think it's really nice to be actually out in the garden and be able to see, to see what's really there in person. So thanks very much.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Megan. It's really interesting, especially the early Cal-Hort interaction there.
Yeah, and there's actually, Mabel Sims wrote 3 articles in the 40s, just going over the different plants that are they were growing at the time. But it ended up being a great resource for us. So it's great that the bulletin existed and was there to capture those details.
Well, in those days, that was a really great resource for exchanging information, like you said, during the freeze. And
Right, a lot harder to have information than now in our information laden world.
definitely. Does anybody have any questions for Megan?
I have a question about the spring. Does it still flow? How much has it been affected
That's
by
a
the
good
drought?
question, because there were multiple springs. And so that spring that was above the formal garden, when the residential infill happened, the water table shifted and that spring stopped flowing. But we do still have some active springs. And if you were walking up the steps from Australia Hollow, you can see there's a pipe where one of the springs is still flowing, and that actually feeds the wetland that's down at the base of Australia Hollow. And sometimes during the dry season, because there's no in-ground irrigation in that whole hollow area, they use that, capture that water into the cistern, and then they can use it for some spot watering down there. But so that spring still flows, but the one that was above in the formal garden does not.
Thank you.
Yep.
I was glad to hear that they were able to move some of their mature plants from their 40-year-old garden to
Right. Right. 35 trucks worth.
yeah, that
It's very funny. She says in an article, she says, and they healed, and we healed them in, and this was in the 50s that she was saying it, and some of them are there still.
Anybody else have any questions for Megan? I understand there's a bird walk on Tuesday I saw on the website.
Yeah, we've been doing monthly bird walks, which with a birder who used to be our neighbor, but they're sponsored by Golden Gate Audubon Society, and you have to register through their website, but she's extremely knowledgeable about the birds that are there because she's been birding there for years. And so she threatens every time that she's not going to do it anymore, but that we'll get someone new to do it, but she's luckily still doing it. And they're very, we have, because of where we are and because of year-round surface water, we just are really lucky in our bird life.
I can imagine with all that
So
overstory.
I have a
trees and
question.
such.
Just a statement. Please do not be offended. I'm a Malvaceae lover and Hoheria is a Malvaceae, not Myrtaceae. Had to tell you that.
Oh, is that true?
Yes.
Huh. Okay.
Don't be
Then
offended.
I
We all
stand
make
corrected.
mistakes. I'm telling you, just, the Malvaceae don't get much credence in my
No.
experience.
Well, that's,
Vertical.
no, I definitely, I appreciate it because things, I always say I forgot more things than I know now.
Yeah. We're ahead of you, honey.
Well, everybody will have to plan a visit to the garden because it's just.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, one disadvantage of the garden is that we're only open Monday through Friday from 8 to 4:30. So that's a little bit tricky for people who don't have flexible schedules. But I would be delighted to do an in-person tour with you guys. Or also, just so you know, we're not open on the weekends except for Cal Day, which is this year is going to be April 23rd, I think, or 4th. Whatever that Saturday is, 23rd. And well, this Saturday. And so we will be open then, and we're doing a tour at 12 o'clock if anybody's around and looking for something to do.
Oh, good to know. That came on just the right time.
Yeah.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions for Megan?
Just to say, I hope everyone is doing well with their dogs there. It's so nice to have a garden that's wonderful to look at. And also you can go with your dog and get a decent walk,
Right.
especially the older we get. So hopefully
Right.
everyone representing.
Well, and it's funny because I'm super, I mean, people are very good. We have dogs are allowed on leash and people are generally really perfect. I love dogs and it's such a fun part of my day to just get to know all my dogs that, come and visit. But I guess there was a gentleman recently who had an experience with someone's dog who was off leash and he was very upset and he's starting the dog free Blake Garden campaign. I've been extra vigilant running around telling everybody to make sure your dog is on a leash at all times because it's a really big part of our garden and it's always been that way. So
It only takes one.
yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Megan. We really appreciate learning about the Blake Garden and
I hope
having
I
a
hope it was
resource so
enjoyable.
close.
Yeah, so definitely come by and see us if you're interested. And if you send me an email first, I'd be happy to give anyone a tour. I would, we really
Okay.
love to do that to show people. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Well, Ted came up earlier and Saxon sent this.
Oh yeah, I it's a brick at UC Berkeley Botanic Garden. I had some money to make donations last year, and it turned out that I qualified for a brick, and so I just thought Ted was a great guy. I don't know. I just thought they asked him. They said there was no brick already with his name on it, so I just donated to Ted, and I thought everyone might like to know. It's that's what it says. I didn't ask anyone for the wording of it, but I would love to have his wife's email address. Bart, I'm sure you keep in touch. I've forgotten her name already, but she's so sweet. And
Diana.
Diana, yeah, of course, yeah. So I'd like to get her email and send her a picture of the brick.
So where are the bricks at the? Is that in the courtyard, right?
Yeah, they have a donor courtyard, and if you give them a certain amount of money, you can get a brick. And so I said, well, why not? And so and anyway, that's what it says, and I hope the wording meets approval of those who knew Ted better than I did.
Yeah, that's nice. He was such a big part of Cal Hort for sure. That's nice. Thank you.
Thanks for doing that, Saxon. It's beautiful.
Yes, that's wonderful.
It seemed right.
Yeah, very nice.
It's great.
Okay, so in June or in May, we're not having a plant forum. So save your photos for June and send them to me on June 20th. And we'll do it all again. And then, so on next month, we're having Peyote colitis and from the Denver Botanic Gardens. I don't know, Bart, do you want to say a little bit about Peyote?
Yeah, I think Peyote is one of those people that needs very little introduction for most of us. He's very well known in horticultural and botanic circles as a speaker, a plant explorer, all kinds of things. He's been with Denver Botanic Garden since 1980. He's won the Scott Medal and the Liberty Hyde Bailey Awards in the past. He's a published author. He's also the current president of the North American Rock Garden Society. And he's going to be speaking to us about connections between Colorado and California, both people, and it's really surprising how many of the early botanists, particularly some of the more influential women botanists, started out in Colorado and then moved to California. And then talking about plants that we share in common or close relatives of plants that we share, as well as some California native plants that are doing extremely well in Colorado gardens. So it should be a very interesting and good meeting. So please plan on attending if you can. Um, because it's our first meeting since the beginning, a first in-person meeting since the beginning of the pandemic, and we're trying to arrange it to be a hybrid meeting, or at least we'll record it. But we're trying to work out everything so that people can watch it live from afar also. But we're also going to be having a lot of plants for sale. Um, and we're going to have a larger than normal plant drawing as well. So that's why we're not having a forum. There's just too many things to coordinate this time as our first in person. So do plan on wearing a mask, preferably for your safety and others. But we can't really require that if you insist on not. But we're looking forward to seeing everyone live and in person.
Okay, so here's what to expect for next month if you either join in person or in via Zoom. So 4 p.m. we're gonna have the walk in the San Francisco Botanic Gardens with Paniotti. So that should be a fun return to do that activity. It's always great to walk around the garden there. And then at 5:30-ish, I'm not sure how long the walks are normally, but I figured it'd be about 5:30-ish. Is that normal? We're gonna have well, everybody's invited to bring their own dinner if they're going for the walks, or if they come early to the meeting. And you can either bring it up your own, or there's plenty of places to eat, and bring it back if you want to eat outside in the patio with everybody else at the County Fair building. And then at 6 o'clock, we'll have the plant sale. We're having, we have plants like last November that are have been grown for us. We probably won't have as many, however, but they'll be there for sale. And then 7:30, Bart will be discussing, instead of the plant forum, Bart will be discussing the, we're going to be pulling some of those plants for the plant drawing after the presentation. And then about 7:45, we'll have Paniotti doing the presentation, and then questions, answers, and then we'll break in the end of the Zoom presentation. And then we'll have the plant drawing at 9:15-ish. And then all of you guys that had volunteered to work at the November meeting have all those plant drawing vouchers that you can trade in for plant drawing tickets. So be sure you bring your vouchers there. Anybody have any questions on any of that?
I'd say hooray for being back in person, having nice long meetings with people.
With real people, huh?
Yeah.
Hooray.
Yeah, it should be nice. And that I know that for the plant sale / drawing, there's going to be at least 10 flats of plants. So, and I think 4 inches the largest size. So that's a lot of plants. So do plan on purchasing or purchasing plants, or purchasing a lot of raffle or plant drawing tickets.
Okie doke. Does anybody else have any announcements or anything else they'd like to say?
Is it possible to get a plant list before the meeting?
It may be. If so, it'll appear on the website. So, and if it does, then we'll have Anne send out an email blast to everyone. But right now, no promises.
So you expect that they'll be pretty similar to the ones that were available in November?
No. There'll be, actually right now, I think there are a lot of geophytes, a lot of bulbs.
Ooh, hey.
Everything changes. So, I mean, the stuff that are the plants that were available at the November sale, I'm sure are not going to be well represented, or maybe even not at all part of this sale. Or so, yeah, just because everything grows and has to be moved along.
It's a
So,
seasonal thing.
yes.
Okay, any other questions? It was good to see everybody on Saturday. Hopefully we'll do more of those coffees in the garden. If anybody has a garden they would love to show off and share, we'd love to go visit. And so let us know. And then hope to see everybody in person or on Zoom. Hopefully that will work out in May.
Thank you, everybody, for doing this. And Ellen, you have been really amazing.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you, Ellen.
Just
Yes.
amazing.
I
Yay,
enjoyed
Ellen.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Right.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Ellen. Bye.
Bye.